Chapter 1. The Echo of the Forgotten. In a small village nestled at the edge of an emerald forest, there lived a young woman named Elara. The village was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the world beyond its borders had forgotten it entirely. But Elara never saw it that way. She had grown up with stories of distant lands, whispered by her grandmother, who had long since passed away. She remembered her grandmother's voice, soft and steady, recounting tales of great adventures and unbreakable bonds. Elara always felt a longing, an unfulfilled desire to experience something beyond the limits of the small village. She worked in a humble bakery that stood at the heart of the village, its scent of fresh bread and cinnamon wrapping the air in a warm embrace. The bakery was a source of comfort for everyone, but for Elara, it was a reminder of the simplicity of her life. She yearned for something more. One afternoon, as she was kneading dough in the back of the bakery, an unexpected visitor arrived. He was unlike anyone Elara had ever seen, tall, with eyes the color of the stormy sea, and a presence that seemed to pull the very air towards him. His name was Aric, and his arrival would set into motion a series of events that would change everything. Aric didn't speak much at first, only observing the villagers with an intensity that made Elara uncomfortable. There was something about him that felt both familiar and foreign, like a forgotten memory resurfacing in the quiet of the night. Over time, Elara and Aric became acquainted, their conversations beginning as nothing more than polite exchanges. But soon, those small talks turned into something deeper. Aric spoke of his travels, of places far beyond the forest, and Elara shared her dreams of the unknown, of a life outside the village. They found in each other a kindred spirit, two souls bound by an unspoken understanding of longing. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Aric took Elara to the edge of the village, where the trees parted to reveal a view of the distant mountains. "There is a place beyond those mountains," Aric said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "A place where people are not bound by the limitations of their past, where love is not just a word, but a force that shapes the very fabric of existence." Elara turned to him, her heart racing. "And what keeps us here, then? If there is such a place, why are we stuck in this village?" Aric looked at her, his eyes searching hers as if he was trying to find the right words. "Because sometimes we have to face the trials of our past before we can move forward. Sometimes love itself is the greatest challenge." Chapter 2. The Promise of the Unknown. The days that followed were filled with a growing tension in Elara's heart. Aric's words had stirred something inside her, something deep and unspoken, and the more they spoke, the more she found herself questioning her place in the world. The village, once a comforting cocoon, now felt like a prison. The simple, rhythmic life she had led for so long seemed too small to contain the restless yearning that had taken root in her soul. She began to watch the people around her, wondering if they, too, felt this same invisible pull toward something greater. But there was no sign of it. The villagers were content, moving through their days with a quiet acceptance that Elara could no longer relate to. It was as if they had given up on the idea of a life beyond their daily routines, and she found herself growing further apart from them. One afternoon, as Elara sat by the window of the bakery, watching the gentle breeze sway the branches of the trees, she felt a presence behind her. Aric stood there, his tall frame casting a shadow over her as the last rays of the sun illuminated his face. His eyes, as always, held a distant, mysterious look, as though he carried a weight that Elara could not yet understand. "I've made a decision," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar gravity. "The time has come for us to leave." Elara turned to him, her heart leaping in her chest. "Leave? But how can we?" "The village, our lives. We can't keep waiting," Aric interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "The journey I've spoken of, it's not just a place. It's a path, a challenge we must face, and it can't be done from here. The world outside these walls is waiting, but it's only through love, true love, that we'll be able to overcome the trials ahead." Elara felt the stirrings of fear and excitement mingle in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the one that would change everything. Yet, at the same time, doubt crept in. Could she really leave everything behind? Could she step into the unknown, where there was no guarantee of safety or success? But when she looked into Aric's eyes, she saw something she had never felt before, a promise. It was not just a promise of adventure, of new lands and uncharted territories, but a promise of something deeper. A promise that love, strong, unwavering love, could give her the strength to face whatever lay ahead. "Are you ready?" Aric asked, his voice low. For a moment, Elara hesitated. She looked around the bakery, the only home she had ever known. The familiar smells of bread and spices, the comforting hum of village life, seemed to fade as the weight of the decision bore down on her. But in that moment, she realized that she had already chosen. She had already made the decision when she first looked into Aric's eyes and felt the call of the unknown. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm ready." Chapter 3: The First Trial. The journey was not easy. From the moment they left the village behind, Elara felt the weight of the world press against her. The road was long and uncertain, winding through thick forests and barren hills, and every step they took seemed to lead them farther away from the comfort of familiarity. As they traveled, Aric spoke little, but Elara could sense the weight of his thoughts. There were times when his eyes would drift toward the horizon, as if searching for something only he could see. Other times he would grow quiet, lost in his own mind. Elara, on the other hand, struggled to keep her thoughts in check. The fear of the unknown gnawed at her, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of wonder. The world around her was vast, filled with mysteries she had never even imagined. Every new landscape, every new town they passed through, was like a piece of a puzzle she had yet to solve. But it was not only the beauty of the world that intrigued her. It was the love between them, this bond that had grown so strong in such a short time. Aric's presence was a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions, and she found herself drawing strength from him, even when she felt the pangs of doubt. One evening, as they camped near a clearing in the woods, Elara sat by the fire, staring into the dancing flames. The crackling sound of the fire was the only sound that broke the silence of the night. "Aric," she called, her voice hesitant. "What do you mean by the trials? What exactly are we facing?" Aric sat beside her, his face lit by the flickering firelight. "The trials are different for each person. They are the challenges that life presents to us, those moments where we must decide whether to stand firm or turn away. But the trials aren't just physical. They test the heart, the soul. And love is what will guide us through them." Elara frowned. "But how can love help us when the challenges are so difficult? What if we can't overcome them?" Aric turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. "That's what makes love powerful. It's not about avoiding the difficulties. It's about facing them together. When we choose to love, truly love, we make the decision to stand side by side, no matter what comes our way." Elara's heart stirred at his words. She realized that the path ahead was not just about exploring the world, it was about understanding the depths of love itself, the kind of love that was unwavering, the kind that could carry them through anything. The fire crackled softly between them, and for the first time since leaving the village, Elara felt a sense of peace. She was no longer afraid. The journey ahead was uncertain, but as long as they had each other, she knew they could face anything that came their way. Chapter 4: The Whispering Winds. Days turned into weeks as Elara and Aric continued their journey. The world around them seemed to shift with each passing day. The forests grew denser, and the roads became more treacherous, with jagged cliffs and swift rivers standing in their way. Yet, through it all, there was a steady rhythm to their journey. The whisper of the wind through the trees, the hum of distant thunder, and the endless sky overhead kept them moving forward. One morning, as they traveled through a valley surrounded by towering mountains, the air seemed to change. The breeze grew colder, and a soft voice on the wind reached Elara's ears. It was as if the very earth was speaking to her, whispering secrets she could not yet understand. "Elara," the wind seemed to call, its voice carrying a familiar tone. "Elara, you must listen. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned to Aric, but he was already a few paces ahead, lost in his thoughts. She shook her head, wondering if the wind was playing tricks on her, but the voice called again, more urgently this time. "Elara, you must listen." The voice was no longer just in the wind. It came from all around her, swirling like a soft melody in her ears. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized it was not just the wind, there was something more at work here. "What is it?" she whispered to herself, stepping away from the path. The world seemed to hold its breath as she followed the voice, her feet moving as if guided by an unseen force. "Elara, you are being tested," the voice said again, its tone both comforting and unsettling. "The path you walk is fraught with trials, and only by understanding your own heart will you be able to face them. The power of love is the key, but first, you must learn to love yourself." Elara paused, her heart heavy with the weight of the words. Love herself? She had always thought of love as something that flowed outward, something she gave to others. But this felt different. How could she love herself when she had never truly understood who she was? The voice seemed to sense her confusion. "You have been running from yourself, Elara. Now you must face the truths you have long buried. Only then will you be able to face the trials ahead." A cold shiver ran down her spine as she turned back to Aric, who had now noticed her absence and was looking toward her with a questioning gaze. But the voice in the wind had fallen silent, leaving her to wonder if it had been nothing more than a fleeting moment of madness. "I'm all right," she called to him, her voice uncertain. "Just caught up in the moment." Aric nodded, though there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "We must keep moving. The trials ahead are not far." With a deep breath, Elara returned to the path, but the words of the wind echoed in her mind. She had been running from herself? What did that mean? And how could she learn to love herself when she was still so unsure of her place in the world? Chapter 5: The Mirror of the Heart. As they pressed on, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. It was as if the air itself had grown heavier, the weight of her own doubts and fears hanging like a shadow at the edge of her mind. She began to question everything she thought she knew about love, about her purpose, about the journey, about herself. One evening, they arrived at a small village nestled between two great cliffs. The villagers were quiet, their faces worn from years of hardship, but there was something in their eyes that spoke of wisdom and experience. It was as if they had seen the world change around them and had accepted their place in it, no matter how difficult the path had been. In the center of the village stood a large stone, weathered by time but still standing tall. It was not an ordinary stone, it was carved with intricate patterns and symbols, each one telling a story of love, loss, and resilience. The villagers gathered around it each evening, and Elara felt an irresistible pull toward it. "That stone," Aric said, his voice low, "is known as the mirror of the heart. It reveals to those who seek it the truth of their own soul." Elara frowned, her heart racing. "What do you mean, the truth of their soul?" "It will show you what you cannot see," Aric explained. "The mirror does not lie. It reflects your innermost fears, your deepest desires. It is a mirror of the love you must have for yourself before you can truly give it to others." The villagers, though wary of strangers, welcomed Elara and Aric into their fold for the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the land, Elara found herself standing before the stone, her hand lightly brushing the cool surface. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, as the moonlight touched the stone, the patterns began to shimmer and shift, revealing images in its depths. At first, she saw nothing but darkness. But slowly, the shadows began to take shape. She saw herself, a younger version, standing alone in a field, surrounded by an endless sea of flowers. She was smiling, her eyes full of hope and possibility. But then the scene shifted. The flowers began to wither, the sky darkened, and Elara saw herself standing alone, tears running down her face. She reached out, but no one came to her aid. The images shifted again, this time showing her walking alone, through the forests and hills, always searching for something she couldn't quite grasp. And in every scene, No matter how far she traveled, there was a feeling of isolation, of a longing for something she couldn't find. The mirror's truth was clear. Elara had always been running, not from others, but from herself. She had spent her life seeking love, but she had never stopped to understand what it truly meant to love herself. Tears welled up in her eyes as the truth of the mirror's reflection hit her. But there was no judgment in the stone's surface, no condemnation. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, as if the stone was telling her that the journey to self-love was not an easy one, but it was one she had to undertake if she ever hoped to truly love another. Chapter 6: The Awakening. The night passed in a haze of thoughts and realizations. As Elara lay awake, staring up at the stars, she felt a deep sense of sadness mixed with hope. The journey ahead was no longer just about finding the answers she sought, it was about finding herself. It was about learning to love the parts of her that she had long ignored or rejected. When the dawn came, Elara stood before the mirror of the heart once more. She placed her hand on its surface, and this time, the reflection was different. There was no darkness, no isolation. Instead, she saw herself standing tall, her eyes filled with a newfound strength and clarity. Love, she realized, was not something that could be given or taken. It was something that had to be nurtured from within. And only when she learned to love herself, truly and completely, would she be ready to face the trials ahead. Chapter 7: The First Trial. With the new dawn breaking over the village, Elara felt a sense of resolve she had never experienced before. The mirror of the heart had shown her the parts of herself she had neglected for so long, and in that clarity, she found a deeper understanding of her journey. But even with this newfound awareness, she knew the trials were only just beginning. Aric had not spoken much that morning, but his eyes had softened when he saw her standing before the stone, her expression no longer burdened with uncertainty. He had recognized the change in her, but it wasn't until they were back on the road that he spoke of what lay ahead. "The first trial will test your courage," Aric said, his voice carrying the weight of the journey they had yet to complete. "It is not an external force that we must face, but something within ourselves. It will challenge you to confront your greatest fear." Elara nodded, her heart racing as the words sank in. She had already faced so much leaving the village, facing the mirror of the heart, confronting her own reflection. But this was different. She had learned to love herself, but was she truly ready to face her greatest fear? They traveled for days, crossing vast plains and climbing rocky hills, until they reached the base of a mountain that seemed to pierce the sky. The mountain was known to the villagers as the Peak of Solitude, and it was said to be where the greatest trials took place. The climb was steep and treacherous, and Elara could feel the weight of the mountain pressing down on her with each step. The air grew thinner as they ascended, and the wind howled in their ears, but still, they pressed on. At the summit, the landscape opened up into a vast, desolate plateau. The sky above them was dark, swirling with storm clouds, and the ground beneath their feet was cracked and barren. It was here, in the heart of the mountain, that the first trial would take place. Aric stopped at the center of the plateau, his eyes scanning the horizon. "This is where you will face your greatest fear, Elara," he said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "You must confront it alone. No one can help you, and there is no escape. Whatever you face here, you must face it with all the courage you have." Elara felt her heart begin to pound in her chest. The storm seemed to grow louder, the winds more violent, as if the very elements themselves were preparing to challenge her. But she knew that this was something she had to do. The trials were not about defeating an enemy or surviving a test, they were about confronting the truth within herself. Taking a deep breath, Elara stepped forward, her mind racing with fear. What would she face? What was the darkness that lay within her, the one she had never truly confronted? She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath, but the storm seemed to intensify around her. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the wind howled like a living creature. And then, suddenly, she saw it. A figure emerged from the swirling mist, its form vague and shadowy at first. But as it drew closer, the shape solidified, and Elara felt her heart stop in her chest. It was herself. A darker version of herself, one filled with anger, regret, and self-doubt. Her eyes were filled with the same pain Elara had seen in the mirror, but this version of herself seemed to embody everything she had feared. "You cannot escape me," the figure said, its voice like the crackling of a fire. "You cannot run from the truth. You are weak. You have always been weak." Elara took a step back, but the figure advanced, its presence overwhelming. It was as though every fear she had ever felt, every doubt, every failure, was standing before her, forcing her to face it head-on. "No," Elara whispered, her voice trembling. "I am not weak." The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You have always been afraid. Afraid to love yourself, afraid to face your own truth. How can you love others when you cannot even love yourself?" The words struck her like a blow, and for a moment, Elara felt as if the ground would swallow her whole. She had never realized how deeply she had been hiding from herself. All the fears she had buried, all the anger and regret, came rushing to the surface, overwhelming her. But then, something inside her shifted. "I am not you," Elara said, her voice growing stronger. "I am not my fears. I am not my mistakes. I am more than this." The dark figure faltered for a moment, and Elara took another step forward. "I have learned to love myself," she continued. "And that means I am worthy of love. I am worthy of happiness." With those words, the figure dissipated, fading into the storm as if it had never existed. The wind calmed, and the sky began to clear, revealing the first light of dawn. Elara stood alone in the center of the plateau, her heart still racing, but filled with a sense of peace she had never known. Aric stepped forward, his face full of quiet approval. "You have passed the first trial." Elara nodded, her body trembling with the weight of what she had just faced. But she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. There were more trials ahead, and each one would push her further. But she was no longer afraid. She had faced her darkest fear and overcome it, and she knew now that nothing could hold her back. Chapter 8: The Second Trial. The days after the first trial passed in a blur, and Elara found herself reflecting on everything she had learned. The confrontation with her fear had been harrowing, but it had also been liberating. She no longer felt the weight of self-doubt pressing down on her, and for the first time, she understood that true love for oneself, was the foundation of everything else. But Aric's words still echoed in her mind. The trials were not over. The next one would come, and she had to be ready. As they journeyed deeper into the mountains, the air grew colder, and the terrain more treacherous. They reached a narrow pass surrounded by sheer cliffs, where the wind howled through the rocks like a chorus of voices. Elara could feel the tension in the air, a sense that something was about to change. At the edge of the pass, they stopped to rest, and Aric turned to Elara with a serious expression. "The second trial will test your fear," he said. "It will challenge your ability to trust, to open yourself to love without fear." Elara frowned, confused. "Trust? But we've already faced so much." "This trial is different," Aric replied. "It is not about facing your fear or your past. It is about the future, the choice to love fully and without hesitation. Trusting that love will guide you, even when the path ahead is uncertain." Elara took a deep breath, knowing that this trial would push her in ways she could not yet imagine. She had learned to love herself, but could she trust herself and others in the face of the unknown? Chapter 9: The Second Trial. The journey through the mountains grew more difficult as the days passed. The terrain became increasingly harsh, with jagged rocks and narrow passes that tested their endurance. But despite the physical challenges, Elara found herself focused on the second trial ahead. She knew it was coming, and every step she took seemed to bring her closer to the point where her trust would be tested. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of purple and gold, they reached a secluded valley. It was a quiet place, untouched by the storms that had followed them, with a soft stream running through it and a tranquil silence that seemed to lull the world into a gentle slumber. "This is it," Aric said, his voice low. He turned to face Elara, his eyes serious. "The second trial begins here." Elara's heart beat faster as she stepped forward, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. Aric's words had given her no clear answers, only the knowledge that this trial would be different from the first. It wouldn't be about facing an external fear, but about something deeper, about love and trust. The ground beneath her feet felt soft, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. But as Elara looked around, something changed. The quiet of the valley grew heavier, more oppressive, and a cold wind suddenly swept through the air. The stream began to churn, the water turning dark and turbulent as though stirred by an unseen force. "Elara," Aric said, his voice now full of urgency. "This is the moment. The trial is not what it seems." Before she could react, the ground shook beneath her, and the air thickened. The sky above began to swirl, dark clouds gathering in an instant, and Elara's heart raced. There was a feeling of instability, of things being out of control, and it was at that moment that Elara realized what the trial was truly about. The valley was not the peaceful place it had appeared to be. It was a manifestation of her doubts, the swirling uncertainty of what lay ahead. It was a reflection of the very thing she had struggled with since the beginning of the journey, her inability to fully trust, to let go of the fear that had kept her from embracing the unknown. A voice echoed through the valley, as if it were coming from every direction. It was her own voice, yet it seemed distant, altered. "Elara," the voice called, full of sorrow. "How can you trust in love when you have never fully trusted yourself?" The words struck her like a bolt of lightning, and she stumbled back, fear flooding her chest. She had always been afraid of being hurt, of losing herself to someone else, of trusting others too deeply. Her love for herself had been hard-earned, and trusting others with that love seemed like a vulnerability she was not ready to face. The swirling winds picked up, and the stream began to rise, its waters threatening to overflow. The earth cracked beneath her, and Elara could feel herself being pulled toward the edge of the valley. She wanted to run, to escape, but something inside her knew she couldn't. The only way forward was through this trial, and to do that, she would have to face the very fears that had held her back. Trusting Aric, trusting herself, trusting the love that had already begun to grow between them, this was the true test. She turned to Aric, her heart heavy with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "What if I lose myself in this? What if trusting love means I will be lost forever?" Aric stepped toward her, his presence calm and unwavering in the midst of the chaos around them. He reached out and took her hand, his touch grounding her. "Trust is not about certainty, Elara," he said softly. "It is about knowing that even in the face of doubt, you choose to move forward. Trust is the act of stepping into the unknown, believing that love will guide you, even when the way is unclear." Elara looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw not just the man she had grown to care for, but the truth of the journey they had embarked upon together. She realized that love was not just something to be given or received, it was something that had to be trusted, even when the future seemed uncertain. With a deep breath, Elara closed her eyes and let go of the fear that had gripped her heart. She reached out, letting the trust she had built in herself and in Aric fill her being. The storm around her began to subside, the winds dying down, the waters of the stream calming. When she opened her eyes, the valley was peaceful once more. The sky had cleared, and the sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, casting golden light across the landscape. The second trial had ended, but Elara knew it was only the beginning of what lay ahead. Aric stood beside her, a quiet smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You've passed the second trial," he said, his voice filled with pride. Elara nodded, a sense of peace settling in her chest. She had trusted, truly trusted, for the first time. And in that trust, she had found strength, not only in herself but in the love they shared. Chapter 11. The Final Trial. The stone door creaked open with a low, mournful sound, and Elara stepped forward into the darkness beyond. The air grew heavier, colder, as if the very atmosphere was dense with uncertainty. For the first time since beginning the journey, Elara felt a deep sense of apprehension. Aric stood beside her, his presence a steady force. He had been her anchor through every trial, but she knew that this final trial was hers alone to face. It would test everything she had learned, her courage, her trust, and the love she had found within herself. The path ahead was narrow and winding, the walls on either side jagged and rough, as though they had been carved out by time itself. The further they walked, the darker it became, until the light from the opening behind them seemed a distant memory. "Elara," Aric said softly, his voice echoing in the silence. "This is the final test. It will not be an external force like the others. It is something deep within you. The trial you face here is not one of strength or trust, it is one of acceptance." "Acceptance?" Elara repeated, confused. "What do you mean?" "You must accept what you have become," Aric said, his gaze steady. "You must accept the love you have given, the love you have received, and the strength you have found. Only when you fully accept all that you are will you be ready to face the final step of your journey." Elara took a deep breath. She had learned so much over the course of the trials. She had faced her fears, trusted in love, and discovered the strength within herself. But this was something different. Acceptance meant more than just understanding what she had done. It meant accepting everything about herself, both the light and the dark, the successes and the failures. As they walked further into the cave, the air grew colder and Elara's breath became shallow. The walls seemed to close in on them, and she could hear the echo of her own footsteps, as though the cave itself was watching her. Then, without warning, the path ahead split into two directions. One led to the left, a narrow passage shrouded in mist, and the other to the right, a wide, open cavern filled with a soft, ethereal light. For a moment, Elara stood still, unsure of which path to take. Her heart raced as she realized that the choice before her was not a simple one, it was the culmination of everything she had learned. Each path represented a different aspect of her journey, one leading to a confrontation with her past, the other to a vision of her future. "Elara," Aric said, his voice a calm presence in the midst of the storm in her mind. "The choice is yours. Both paths will lead you to the truth, but only you can decide which one to take." She turned to him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "How do I know which path is right?" Aric smiled gently, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. "You already know. The answer lies within you. The final trial is about accepting what you need, not what you think you should want." Elara's mind raced. She thought of the journey so far, of the trials she had faced, the fears she had overcome, and the love she had come to understand. The narrow passage to the left seemed to call to her, its darkness inviting her to confront the past, to come to terms with the parts of herself she had long buried. The path to the right, on the other hand, glowed with a light that promised a new beginning, a future built on the love she had learned to trust. Both paths felt equally daunting, but Elara knew that to accept herself fully, she had to face the past and the future with equal courage. The truth she had sought was not just in the destination, it was in the acceptance of both the light and the dark, the past and the future, the love she had found and the love she had yet to discover. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, choosing the path to the left. The air grew colder as she walked, but she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a quiet strength within herself, a certainty that she was ready to face whatever awaited her. As she moved deeper into the passage, the mist seemed to part, revealing a large, circular chamber. In the center of the room stood a mirror unlike any Elara had ever seen. It was not just a reflection of her physical form, it seemed to go deeper, showing her soul, her heart, and her past. The mirror began to shimmer, and Elara saw herself as a child, full of hope and wonder. She saw the moments of joy and love she had experienced, but she also saw the moments of pain and loss. She saw the years of self-doubt, the times when she had felt unloved and unworthy. And then, she saw the woman she had become, the woman who had faced her fears, trusted in love, and discovered the strength within herself. The reflection in the mirror was not perfect, it was flawed, broken in places, but it was hers. It was the culmination of everything she had been through, everything she had learned, and everything she had become. The woman in the mirror was no longer just a reflection of the past. She was the woman who had chosen to embrace herself, to accept her flaws and her strengths. Tears filled Elara's eyes as she looked into the mirror. For the first time, she saw herself with compassion and understanding. She had been so focused on becoming someone else, someone perfect, that she had forgotten to love the woman she already was. The mirror began to glow, and Elara's reflection smiled back at her, a smile filled with love and acceptance. In that moment, she understood. The final trial was not about defeating an enemy or conquering a fear. It was about accepting herself, with all her imperfections and her beauty. Only by fully accepting who she was could she truly move forward. With a deep breath, Elara turned away from the mirror, her heart light with the knowledge that she had passed the final trial. She had embraced who she was and had found the love and acceptance she had been searching for all along. Chapter 12. The Horizon Awaits. When Elara emerged from the cave, the light of the outside world greeted her, bright and warm. Aric stood at the entrance, waiting for her. His eyes met hers, and a silent understanding passed between them. She had completed the trials. She had found the strength, the trust, and the acceptance she needed to move forward. "I knew you could do it," Aric said, his voice filled with pride. Elara smiled, a deep sense of peace settling in her heart. "I've learned that the greatest journey is not about finding something outside of ourselves. It's about discovering the love we already have within us." Together, they stood at the edge of the mountain, looking out over the vast landscape that stretched before them. The world was wide, full of possibilities and unknowns, but Elara no longer feared it. She had found the strength to face whatever came her way, armed with the love she had discovered and the acceptance of who she was. As they turned to begin the next part of their journey, Elara knew that the path ahead would not always be easy, but it would be hers to walk, side by side with Aric, with the love they had found together, and with the knowledge that love, in all its forms, was the greatest power of all. Epilogue: The Power of Love. Elara and Aric continued their journey beyond the mountains, their hearts now aligned with a shared purpose. The world before them was vast, and although the challenges of the trials were behind them, the path they walked together was far from simple. But Elara knew, deep in her soul, that she was ready. The love that had blossomed between her and Aric was not a fleeting emotion. It was a force that would carry them through the rest of their lives. As they ventured through unfamiliar lands, Elara thought often of the trials she had faced. Each one had tested her in ways she hadn't imagined, but they had also shaped her into someone stronger, someone more complete. She had learned to trust, to love, and, most importantly, to accept herself fully. The villages they passed through noticed the change in Elara. She no longer carried the weight of doubt in her eyes. People saw the confidence in her step, the softness in her smile, the kindness in her words. And though she had once feared the unknown, now she embraced it because, with Aric by her side, she knew that no matter where the road led, they would face it together. One evening, as they sat by a campfire on a quiet hill overlooking a wide valley, Elara turned to Aric, a peaceful smile gracing her lips. The firelight danced in his eyes, and for a moment, the world felt still, as though time itself had paused to witness their love. "You know," Elara said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "I used to think love was something that could be found outside of ourselves. I thought it was something I had to earn, or something that would be given to me. But now I know that love is something that starts within us. It's the love we give to ourselves that shapes everything else." Aric nodded, his gaze softening. "Love has always been a powerful force," he said. "But it's not just about what we give to others. It's also about what we allow ourselves to receive. Only when we accept our own worth can we fully appreciate the love we are capable of offering and the love that others give us in return." Elara leaned back, staring up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. The vastness of the universe reminded her of how small yet significant their journey had been. In the grand scheme of things, their path was just a single thread in the tapestry of the world. But for Elara, it had been everything. And as the stars twinkled above them, Elara realized something profound. It wasn't the trials themselves that had changed her, it was the love that had guided her through them. The love she had for herself, The trust she had found in Aric, and the acceptance of everything she was, had brought her to this moment. And now, as the world stretched endlessly before them, Elara knew that love would continue to lead her through every step, every challenge, and every new beginning. The trials were over.